Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm your narrator, Davis. Tonight, I've got 3 disturbing true thunderstorm horror stories, all based on real accounts. I think you're really going to enjoy these. If you do, make sure to drop a like on the video and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing that. Also, only a small percentage of people who watch are actually subscribed. If you're into true horror stories and want more of them regularly, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Alright, get comfortable, turn the lights down, and let's get into tonight's stories. I didn't grow up afraid of storms, but I learned to respect them early. I live in Western Kentucky now, in a part of the state where tornado watches are normal and warnings aren't rare. If you live there long enough, you learn the routine. When the weather turns bad, you check your phone, turn on the local station, and make sure you know where you'll go if the sirens start. For me, that place was always the basement. I've lived in my house for 6 years. It's a simple place built in the late 70s, with a single main floor and a partially finished basement. The basement door is at the end of the hallway, heavy wood, with a deadbolt that only locks from the top. I'm careful about it. I always keep it locked, especially during storm season, not because of fear, but because it's habit. That night started with a tornado watch that upgraded quickly. The sky turned that strange green-gray color that everyone in the Midwest recognizes. The air felt thick. My phone buzzed every few minutes with updates. I made dinner early, packed a small bag with water and a flashlight, and set my shoes by the basement door. By the time the warning came through, the wind had already picked up. Rain was hitting the house hard enough to rattle the windows. I could hear distant thunder rolling steadily. I grabbed my phone and the bag and walked down the hallway. The basement door was open. Not cracked, open, wide enough that I could see the first few steps leading down into the darkness. I stopped immediately. My first thought was that I'd forgotten to close it earlier. That happens sometimes. I'm human. But then I remembered locking it that morning. I have a routine. Before work, I check the door. I always turn the deadbolt and pull once to make sure it's secure. I remember doing it because my hand brushed against a small splinter on the door frame that I keep meaning to sand down. The door shouldn't have been open. I stood there for a few seconds, listening. The house was otherwise quiet except for the storm outside. No movement, no voices, no sounds from the basement. I told myself it was fine. Maybe I was remembering wrong. Stressed as that to people. I reached out and flipped the light switch at the top of the stairs. The basement lights came on. Everything looked normal from what I could see. The stairs were clear. The floor at the bottom looked the same as always. I stepped closer and looked down. That's when I noticed the second thing that felt wrong. The deadbolt was unlocked. Not broken, not damaged, just unlocked, like someone had turned it from my side of the door. I locked it automatically, without thinking. Then hesitated. If I locked it, I'd be locking myself out of my shelter. If someone was down there, locking it wouldn't help anyway. The wind outside howled harder, and my phone buzzed again with another alert. I didn't have time to overthink it. I unlocked the door and started down the stairs. The basement felt cooler than usual, damp but not flooded. The air had a stale smell I hadn't noticed before, like the room hadn't been used in a long time. I checked every corner. Storage room, laundry area, utility closet. Everything was where it should be. No signs of anyone else being there. I locked the basement door behind me from the inside and sat against the far wall, waiting out the storm. For a while, nothing happened. The storm outside intensified. The house creaked under the wind. I checked my phone repeatedly, watching the radar, listening to updates. Then I heard something upstairs. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving down the hallway. I froze. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses make noise during storms. That's normal. But these footsteps had weight to them. They moved from one end of the hallway to the other. Then they stopped, right outside the basement door. I held my breath. The doorknob turned. Slowly. It didn't open. The deadbolt held. There was a pause. Then the knob turned again, harder this time. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. After several seconds, the pressure stopped. I listened as the footsteps moved away, back down the hallway, then toward the living room. The storm raged on for another 30 minutes. When the warning finally expired, I waited another 10 before unlocking the door. I didn't want to walk upstairs while the adrenaline was still high. When I opened the basement door, the hallway light was on. I know for a fact I had turned it off before going downstairs. I cleared the house room by room, checking every door and window. Everything was locked. Nothing was missing. No signs of forced entry. The only thing out of place was the basement door. The deadbolt was unlocked again. I sold the house 3 months later. During the inspection, the buyer asked if I'd ever had problems with the basement door opening on its own. I asked what he meant. He said the previous owner had the same complaint. I worked overnight maintenance at a county hospital in southern Tennessee for almost 7 years. It wasn't a big place. 2 floors, one older wing that dated back to the 1960s, and a newer addition that handled most of the patient rooms. If you've ever been in a rural hospital at night, you know how quiet they get. Not peaceful, just empty in a way that feels unfinished. Night shift maintenance is mostly routine. Reset alarms, fix doors, replace lights, help nurses move equipment. I knew the building better than anyone except maybe security. And even then, I spent more time in places most people never went. Storms were always the worst nights. The hospital had backup generators, but they were old. They worked, but only just. When storms rolled in, everyone got tense because nobody trusted them completely. That night, a line of severe thunderstorms came through around midnight. Wind, heavy rain, lightning, the whole thing. Tornado watches were posted, but no warning yet. We'd been through worse. At 12:38 a.m., the power flickered. At 12:39, it went out. Emergency lights kicked on immediately, casting that dull yellow glow that makes everything look sickly. The generators came online a few seconds later. I heard the familiar rumble from outside and felt some relief. Then one of the alarms started. It wasn't loud, just a steady alert from the old wing, the part of the hospital that was barely used anymore. Mostly storage, a few long-term care rooms, and one closed ward that hadn't been updated in years. I grabbed my radio and headed that way. The hall lights in the old wing were dimmer than usual. Some flickered. The air felt heavier, warmer. The generators didn't fully power the HVAC back there. The alarm panel showed a power fluctuation warning in room 217. That room wasn't supposed to be occupied. I knew that for a fact. Room 217 was on the list of closed rooms due to faulty wiring. We used it for storing and used beds and equipment. No patients. No staff assigned. I assumed the system was glitching because of the storm. When I reached the room, the door was closed. That was the first thing that made me stop. We always kept storage rooms open. Easier access. Less hassle. I put my hand on the door handle. It was warm. Not just room temperature. Warm like someone had been inside for a while. I opened the door slowly. The room lights were on. That shouldn't have been possible on generator power, especially in a closed room. The beds were gone. The storage equipment was gone. There was a hospital bed in the center of the room, occupied. A man lay on it. hooked up to monitors that weren't supposed to be functional. The screens glowed faintly. His chest rose and fell slowly. I stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. "Hello," I said quietly. The man didn't respond. I checked the chart at the foot of the bed. No name, no ID number, just a handwritten note taped to the clipboard. "Do not move patient during storm conditions." I stepped back into the hallway and called the nurse's station. They told me there was no patient assigned to that room. No overflow. No emergency transfer. Nothing. I told them to come look anyway. When we returned together less than 2 minutes later, the room was empty. The bed was gone. The lights were off. The door was open. The alarm panel cleared itself. The nurse laughed it off, said it must have been stress or low lighting. I didn't argue, but I knew what I'd seen. At 1:12 a.m., another alert came in. Room 214. Same wing, same issue. I went alone this time. Room 214 was also supposed to be empty. It wasn't. This time it was a woman, older, breathing shallow. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. The monitors showed heart activity, but the readings didn't make sense. The numbers lagged, like they were delayed. I noticed something else too. The door didn't have a room number anymore. The metal plate was gone, leaving only screw holes. I backed out of the room slowly and went straight to security. They pulled up camera feeds from the old wing. The footage showed empty hallways, empty rooms. But every few minutes, the timestamp jumped forward slightly, a few seconds at a time, enough to miss something walking through. Then one of the guards noticed something. The patient rooms weren't showing on camera at all. They were just dark rectangles, like the feed skipped them entirely. At 2:03 a.m., the generators sputtered. Lights dimmed further. Some systems shut down automatically to preserve power. That's when patients started disappearing. Not from the active wing, from the old one. A nurse doing rounds realized 2 long-term patients were missing from their beds. Both had been stable. Both had doors that were still locked from the inside. We searched, room by room. Every missing patient had last been assigned to a room closest to the old wing hallway, and every empty room smelled like ozone and damp concrete. At 3:17 a.m., the power fully restored. Generators shut down. Normal lighting returned. The storm passed. We found one patient. Just one. He was in room 217, the room that wasn't supposed to be in use. He was alive, but barely. Severe hypothermia. No explanation for how he got there. He died 2 days later. Before he passed, he told a nurse that someone kept moving him during the storm because the rooms weren't safe yet. The hospital closed the old wing permanently after that. They said it was due to wiring issues. I quit 3 months later. Hospitals don't feel empty to me anymore. They feel crowded. I didn't believe in rules for places until I stayed in that cabin. Before that, I thought rules were just superstition layered on top of boredom. Things people made up to give meaning to ordinary situations. I'd heard about cabins with lists taped to walls before, usually online, and I always assumed they were exaggerated or fake. This one wasn't. I live in Ohio, but I'd taken a week off work in early fall to spend some time alone in the Appalachian foothills in eastern Kentucky. Nothing extreme. No deep wilderness. Just a quiet area where cell service fades in and out and neighbors are far enough away that you don't hear them. The cabin belonged to a co-worker's uncle. He rented it out cheaply, mostly to people he trusted. It sat on a narrow gravel road that wound up the side of a wooded ridge. The drive up was steep and uneven, but manageable in dry weather. When I arrived, the weather was clear, cool but calm. I unloaded my things, checked the propane heater, and walked the perimeter like I always do when I stay somewhere unfamiliar. Everything seemed normal. Inside, the cabin was simple. One main room with small kitchen area, a bedroom off to the side, and a bathroom in the back. No basement, just a crawl space beneath part of the structure. That's when I noticed the paper taped to the refrigerator. It wasn't decorative, just a plain sheet, handwritten, laminated with packing tape. At the top it said, "Storm Guidelines." There were 6 bullet points. I smiled when I read it. I remember shaking my head slightly, thinking it was some kind of joke or a leftover from someone anxious about weather. The rules were specific. They didn't talk about tornado safety or flash flooding. They talked about what to do if a storm arrived suddenly, what lights to turn off, which room to stay in, and one line stood out immediately. If the storm blocks the road, do not attempt to leave until morning, no matter what you hear outside. That line stayed with me, but I ignored it. The first day passed quietly. I cooked dinner, read, and went to bed early. No storms, no issues. The second afternoon, the weather changed. Clouds rolled in fast, lower than usual, clinging to the ridge tops. The air felt heavy, and the temperature dropped more than expected. I checked the forecast. Thunderstorms were possible overnight, but nothing severe. By early evening, rain started. Not heavy at first, just steady. I made dinner and watched it through the window, listening to the wind pick up. Around 9, the power flickered. Then it went out completely. I wasn't surprised. Rural area, old lines. I grabbed a lantern and checked the breaker out of habit, even though I knew it wouldn't help. That's when the thunderstorm really started. The rain intensified fast. Wind pushed hard against the cabin, making the walls creak. Thunder rolled constantly, overlapping instead of spaced out. I checked my phone and saw I had no signal. I remembered the paper on the fridge. I read it again, this time slower. One rule said to turn off all exterior lights once the storm began. Another said to stay out of the bedroom during heavy rain. That didn't make sense to me. I followed it anyway, moving my pillow and blanket to the couch. Then I heard something outside. At first, I assumed it was a tree branch or debris hitting the siding. That happens during storms, but it didn't stop. It sounded like movement. Slow, uneven movement around the back of the cabin, near where the ground sloped downward into the trees. I told myself it was water runoff, or an animal seeking shelter. I went to the window and looked out. Visibility was poor, but I could see the gravel road. Water was already flowing down it in small streams. Mud was sliding along the edges. The road wasn't completely blocked yet, but it wouldn't take much. That's when I heard knocking. Not loud, not frantic. 3 slow knocks on the back wall of the cabin. I froze. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Another 3 knocks came a few seconds later, slightly closer to the corner of the building. My first thought was that someone had driven up and needed help. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe someone stuck on the road. I took 1 step toward the back door, then stopped. I remembered the rule. No matter what you hear outside. I stood there listening. The knocking moved. It traveled along the wall, stopping near the bedroom window. Then it stopped entirely. The storm worsened. Thunder shook the cabin hard enough to make items rattle on the shelves. Rain hammered the roof relentlessly. At some point, the gravel road gave way. I heard it happen. A deep, grinding sound, followed by rushing water. I went to the front window and saw part of the road collapse into the slope below. There was no way down until morning, even if the storm stopped. That's when the footsteps started. They were slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. Not running, not stumbling, just walking. I stayed on the couch, lantern off, wrapped in a blanket, listening. The footsteps stopped at the front door. The handle moved slightly. Not enough to open it, just enough to test it. I felt my throat tighten. but I didn't react. The handle stopped moving. A voice spoke from the other side. It sounded calm, familiar in tone, even though I didn't recognize it. It said my name, exactly the way people say it when they're trying to sound reassuring. I didn't respond. The voice asked me to open the door. It said the storm was dangerous. It said the road was unsafe. All things I already knew. I stayed silent. The voice changed. It became annoyed, then impatient, then flat. It told me I was being rude. After that, it stopped speaking. The footsteps moved away. Hours passed. I didn't sleep. I just waited. Just before dawn, the storm weakened. The rain slowed. The wind died down. I waited another hour before checking outside. There were footprints in the mud around the cabin. Barefoot, they stopped at the edge of the washed-out road. I left as soon as it was safe. When I told my co-worker's uncle what happened, he nodded slowly and said the rules were written after his brother stayed there one fall. His brother didn't follow them.